It was my third year as Mrs. Davies when a clumsy fall knocked my head and prematurely unlocked memories of the rest of my life. I had become the villainous side character in a heartwarming, fluffy family romance novel. My husband? The quiet, loyal second male lead who secretly adored the heroine. My brother-in-law? The scummy ex-boyfriend of the heroine. My elder brother-in-law? The ultimate alpha male lead. And me? Married to the second lead, coveting the main character, flirting with the younger brother, and trying to charm every other eligible man. I was a walking disaster, constantly making trouble for the heroine until I finally managed to kill myself. The rumor goes that when I died, I was clutching half of a fried butter I had dug out from a trash can. Welcome to the Hee Hee Story channel. Don't forget to subscribe to the Hee Hee Story channel. Story begins. Charlotte Clark died in a blizzard, her body discovered with a death grip on a fried butter she fished out from the garbage, they'd say. The news spread back to Sea City, and everyone who knew me thought I got what I deserved. They laughed, they cursed, and in no time, I was forgotten. No one would remember me after a while. Excuse me, what? I don't even eat fried butter. And from a trash can? Who were they trying to humiliate? Suddenly, I shot up from bed, but the dizziness quickly pulled me back down. 5 days. I had been stuck in this bed for 5 days, suffering from a mild concussion. The doctor had ordered bed rest. 5 days ago, we were celebrating my 3rd wedding anniversary with Thomas Davies. Our families decided to throw a grand event. On one hand, it marked 3 years of union between our families. On the other hand, a new project between our companies had just completed its early stages and needed the perfect occasion to go public. No birthdays or holidays were coming up, so naturally, the anniversary became the chosen event. Neither mine nor Thomas's personal preferences mattered. At least not in the slightest. Fortunately, we were both practical people, long past the rebellious phase of youth. As long as it benefited us and our families, we would cooperate. If we couldn't cooperate willingly, we'd force ourselves to. We'd played the role of a loving couple at countless social gatherings, and that night was no different. I smiled demurely, slipping my arm through Thomas's as we descended the grand staircase. Just as we reached the middle step, Thomas received an important business call. "Go ahead, I'll join you after," he said, stepping aside. I waved him off with a casual smile. I wasn't a helpless child. I could handle these events on my own. He hesitated, eyeing my high heels. "Be careful on the stairs," he warned. I rolled my eyes. "I'm not an idiot, okay?" And then I missed a step. I tumbled down the stairs in front of Thomas and all the guests, knocking myself unconscious in the process. The next thing I knew, I woke up in a hospital bed, diagnosed with a mild concussion. Nothing serious, just a few days of rest, and I would be fine, the doctor assured Thomas. He told him I might experience nausea, dizziness, and even some retrograde amnesia, forgetting the incident entirely. When I regained consciousness, the doctor asked me a few questions before concluding, "Looks like you remember everything. No amnesia, just a bit of nausea, which will pass in a day or two." But I disagreed. There was a big problem. A very big one. While I hadn't lost my memory, strange fragments of images had begun flooding my mind. Disjointed, chaotic memories that seemed to come from another life. These strange flashes of recollection persisted over the next 5 days, even as the rest of my symptoms improved. And today, I finally pieced it all together. If these memories were real, if I was truly living inside a novel, then I had undoubtedly been cast as the evil supporting character. Thomas Davies, my loving husband, was actually the male lead's best friend, silently devoted to the heroine. His younger brother, Henry Davies, was the heroine's wild, rebellious ex-boyfriend. And his older brother, Edward Davies, was the male lead, the cold, stoic, perfect CEO. The heroine? According to my memories, her name was Clementine Taylor, an ordinary young woman who had just graduated from college and was caught in a tangled love story between these men. As for me, the moment I laid eyes on Clementine, jealousy consumed me. I tormented her relentlessly, enraged that all the men around me, including my husband, were drawn to her. Despite having a gentle, handsome husband, I inexplicably found myself infatuated with Edward, the alpha male lead. Naturally, he treated me with disdain. And when my attempts to woo him failed, I turned my attention to Henry, my brother-in-law. What kind of soap opera nightmare had I landed in? Even modern TV dramas wouldn't dare script something this absurd. This plot made no sense and was completely out of character for me. I wasn't some love-struck fool. I was a practical, money-minded woman. Love was a luxury I didn't need. In this world, most marriages, like mine with Thomas, were nothing more than business alliances. True love? Who had time for that? At 20, my family arranged my marriage to Thomas after we'd met only 3 times. The elders settled everything, and the sum total of our conversations before the wedding didn't even reach 100 words. Love. It was a fantasy. Thomas's brothers might have been handsome, but they weren't my type. Edward was stiff and dull, and Henry was temperamental and reckless. Compared to them, my husband was actually quite pleasant. Thomas was patient, respectful, and we were compatible in every sense. Our marriage was practical and beneficial for both families, which suited me just fine. He didn't love me, and I didn't love him. We both understood that. If he hadn't married me, he would have married some other heiress, treated her just as well, and gone about his life in exactly the same way. He was all about business. Love and a happy marriage were secondary concerns. And that was where we saw eye to eye. Love was a fleeting dream, but money? That brought real security. So how could I possibly lose my mind over Edward? It was ridiculous. Maybe I really had hit my head too hard. I made a mental note to schedule another checkup. While planning, I picked up my phone and messaged Thomas. Hey, can you bring me some spicy chips when you get home? The big bag. I couldn't resist junk food, and after 5 days without, I was craving it. Thomas, always busy, rarely had time to reply instantly, but he answered within 3 minutes. I spoke to the doctor. He recommended you stick to a light diet for a few more days. No fried or spicy food until after your checkup tomorrow. I feel fine now. I can go for the checkup today. We have an appointment for tomorrow. I'm swamped today and can't take you. I can go on my own. Don't worry about me. Thomas hesitated, then relented slightly. I'll have Joey go with you. I'll contact Dr. Brown to reschedule. Joey was the daughter of the Davies family's head housekeeper. After graduating college without finding a suitable job, she returned to the estate to help out. Normally, Thomas and I didn't like having strangers in the house, so we relied on temporary cleaning services. But since my injury, Thomas had requested Joey to stay and assist. She was reliable, having grown up in the Davies household, and we shared a common understanding of the world of wealth. I agreed to let her accompany me, and she quickly prepared the car. As we drove to the hospital, Joey casually mentioned, "Ma'am, I have a friend who recently graduated from Sea City University. She's excellent, interned at a big company, and her bosses spoke highly of her. I heard the eldest master's assistant is on maternity leave, and they're looking for a replacement. The position is by internal referral only. Do you think you could mention her to Mr. Thomas and help her get a chance?" In this society, it was all about connections, and asking for favors was nothing new. I barely know the company's affairs. You want me to ask Thomas to recommend someone to his brother? I replied. Well, Mr. Edward is out of town on business, and he left the hiring to Mr. Thomas for the time being. Fine. It was a small favor, and I wasn't one to refuse help. Send me her resume later. I'll talk to him about it, but no promises. Joey beamed. Thank you. I'll send it right after we get back. Just remember, I'm not guaranteeing anything. Of course, ma'am. Just giving her a chance is enough. I thought for a moment. What's her name? Oh, her name is Clementine Taylor. Wait, what? I was stunned, my brain struggling to process the familiar name. What did you say her name was again? Clementine Taylor, Joey repeated, oblivious to my shock. I murmured an absent-minded as I stared out the window, lost in thought. My brain sluggishly turned over the details until, finally, something felt off. What did you say her name was again? I asked, my voice betraying my confusion. Joey responded without hesitation, Clementine Taylor. What? Shock hit me like a cold wave, and I forgot all about my craving for spicy chips. The moment we got home, I hurriedly asked Joey to send me Clementine Taylor's resume. She was quick. In less than 5 minutes, a colorful resume appeared on my phone. At the top right corner, there was a headshot of the girl. Her hair was long and sleek, a dark black, and though she wasn't stunningly beautiful, she wasn't plain either. Clementine Taylor had a classic oval face with delicate features. At first glance, she seemed easy to overlook, but when she smiled, 2 tiny dimples lit up her entire face, making her look remarkably charming. She had that understated elegance, the type of beauty that grew on you the more you looked. No wonder Henry Davies had been hooked for so many years. He never went for the bold and glamorous type. This gentle, almost girl-next-door charm was clearly his weakness. And now it made sense why, despite their endless fights, he always came crawling back to her, wearing that stubborn grin of his. I hesitated for a moment, wondering if I should even pass this resume along to Thomas. But I prided myself on being someone who kept her word. Besides, there was absolutely no way I could ever fall for my brother-in-law, so jealousy wouldn't drive me to make Clementine's life difficult. If, as my memory suggested, Thomas truly did fall for Clementine Taylor, I'd just keep this marriage going as long as it worked. And if it didn't? Well, I'd take a hefty settlement and vanish into the sunset. Who cared about getting tangled in their love triangle? Especially when I was always the unwanted piece on the side. Thomas worked late that night and didn't get home until after 9. Joey had already instructed the chef to prepare something for him, and then she came up to my room to inform me. "Mr. Thomas is back, ma'am. Would you like to go downstairs to see him?" Joey's reminder was a subtle nudge to keep my promise. Reluctantly, I pulled myself out from under the covers, threw on a knitted cardigan, and waved her off to go about her chores. Joey's bright smile as she left made it clear. She was quite fond of Clementine Taylor. By the time I made it downstairs, Thomas Davies was already at the dinner table, his eyes glued to the financial news on his tablet. He was the epitome of a workaholic, always trying to squeeze 3 minutes out of every one. At least he'd made time to get married, unlike his older brother, Edward, who had practically set up camp in his office. He only showed up at the family estate for monthly dinners, and even then, he was as elusive as a dragon. Edward was nearing 30, still single, and if the mess with Clementine Taylor was any indication, he wouldn't be settling down anytime soon. A 30-year-old eligible bachelor was rare, but a 30-year-old pure-hearted one? Practically an endangered species. Thomas once mentioned that his brother had never even been in a relationship, let alone kissed anyone. At this rate, he might as well become a wizard. These random thoughts filled my mind as I settled next to Thomas. He lowered his tablet and glanced at me. "What did the doctor say?" "Everything's fine. I've fully recovered." "That's good." Relief softened his tired features, and he finally allowed himself a small smile. "You're tall enough. Maybe skip the high heels from now on," he teased, referencing my fall from days ago, the first time he had brought it up. I took the hint. "Sorry for messing up such an important event," I said, accepting my mistake. "It's all right. Your health is what matters." "And what did your grandfather say?" "He just asked about how you were doing. Nothing more." Thomas had likely shouldered most of the pressure from the Davies family, but surprisingly, there had been no word from my side of the family, the Clarks. Aside from a single half-hearted phone call from my mother after I woke up, no one had chastised me for ruining the event. It was no surprise, though. In the world of the Clarks, family ties were thin at best. Every penny spent on me had always been treated as an investment, and they were careful never to make a bad one. At the legal age of marriage, I was promptly thrown into the dating pool, with my family turning their noses up at anyone whose background didn't match theirs. They'd finally deemed Thomas Davies acceptable, a veritable golden ticket. At our wedding, both families announced a major business partnership, and Thomas was given the responsibility for its success, a reward for sacrificing a happy marriage to further family interests. He agreed to the union, but not out of love. As the second child, his position was awkward. With an outstanding older brother groomed to inherit and a reckless younger one, Thomas wanted more. He saw marriage as a shortcut to gaining the resources he needed. At least, the Davies family was harmonious. The 3 brothers supported one another, each playing their part in the family business. Henry Davies, once a spoiled playboy, had been whipped into shape after shadowing his brothers for a year. Now, he even spoke with a hint of formality. The Clark family, on the other hand, was a mess. My father had more illegitimate children than I could count, and my older brother followed in his footsteps, becoming a father to 3 children before even getting married. My mother? She used my father's money to keep a stable of boyfriends. In the world of elite marriages, most couples led separate lives, as long as their actions didn't cause a scandal. To this day, I hadn't even met my half-siblings. Lost in these thoughts, I was pulled back by Thomas's voice. Have you contacted your family? No. Find time to visit them. They're worried about you. Doubtful. They were probably only concerned about the negative publicity. My well-being had never mattered. In that strange flood of memories, I saw a future where, after our divorce, my family turned their backs on me. When the Davies brothers demanded an apology from me to Clementine Taylor, my father revoked my trust fund and froze my accounts, leaving me penniless. I ended up living in a tiny town, where I was robbed of the last of my possessions and died in a freezing, empty apartment. The Clarks sent someone to cremate me and scattered my ashes in some desolate place. With family like that, I saw no reason to maintain ties. I didn't dwell on the topic. Instead, I picked up my phone, forwarded Clementine's resume to Thomas, and said, I heard your brother is short on staff. Joey has a friend who just graduated, and her major seems to fit. Take a look. Thomas raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised. I never showed any interest in the company's affairs. Did Joey ask you to talk to me? She mentioned it casually. Just an interview, nothing more. It's up to you whether she gets hired. He gave a small knowing smile before opening the resume. His eyes narrowed. The resume is sloppy, he commented, but her work experience aligns with the position. I shrugged. I'm just passing the message. Do with it what you will. I'll give her an interview. If this is the same resume she sends to HR, she'll waste her time. They go through hundreds of resumes a day, and this one wouldn't make the cut. Aren't most resumes like this? It's too casual. If she can't even create a proper resume, how can anyone trust her to handle important documents and contracts? Assistants need to be sharp. If she messes up, you'll be the one cleaning up after her. I silently agreed, my belief in those strange memories growing stronger with every confirmation of Clementine Taylor's existence. Thomas wasn't a bad husband. If possible, I'd prefer not to end up in a divorce. But the image of him coldly tossing divorce papers in my face flashed through my mind, and I quickly squashed that thought. There were plenty of men in the world. If this loveless marriage ended, I'd still have my savings. I could live freely, just like my mother, even hire a few boyfriends to keep things interesting. Well then, I'll tell Joey to have her friend redo the resume. I'll send you the internal email. Tell Joey to tell her friend to use my name as a reference. That'll guarantee she gets in for the first round. I nodded, quickly passing on the message, and Joey sent a flurry of grateful responses in return. With the task done, I stretched and yawned. I'm heading to bed. You should get some rest when you finish up. Thomas looked at me intently. You're sure you're feeling fine? Positive. He nodded. Then, we can stop sleeping in separate rooms? I blinked. The word yes was at the tip of my tongue when Clementine Taylor's smiling face flashed before my eyes, and I changed course. Give me a few more days to adjust my schedule. I've been waking up in the middle of the night lately, and I don't want to disturb you. It's fine. I don't sleep much anyway. You will if we're together. Sleeping without you is what disturbs me, he said with a small grin. What kind of talk was this? I clicked my tongue. A man with big ambitions shouldn't be so distracted by a woman. Thomas chuckled, the corners of his eyes crinkling in amusement. I'm used to sleeping with you. What were you thinking? Or, are you hinting at something? What kind of nonsense was this? Did he think I was that desperate? Though, in the future, when he inevitably fell for Clementine Taylor and we went our separate ways, would I ever find another man of his caliber? The thought was oddly tempting. Sensing my silence, Thomas quickly said, I was just joking. You're recovering. I wouldn't try anything. No, I said, leaning down to kiss his forehead. You weren't wrong. I was hinting at something. He blinked in surprise, then broke into a wide smile, setting down his utensils and pulling me onto his lap. My back pressed against his chest, and I could feel the quiet rumble of his laughter. What are you laughing at? I snapped, feeling both embarrassed and amused. He rested his chin on my shoulder, nuzzling against me like a puppy. You were right. I am distracted by you. Given that I was still recovering, Thomas didn't push things too far. After helping me freshen up, he headed to the study to work late into the night. With my mind now wide awake, I settled back into bed to check my phone. A message popped up from my not-so-close friend, Mimi Gray, along with a few pictures. Shocking. Henry Davies caught kissing a Cinderella on the street. Life is wild, huh? You really do see everything if you live long enough. Apparently, she's from a poor area. My friends at Sea City University have seen Henry hanging around her. They've been on and off for ages. After their latest breakup, they went 3 months without contact, and everyone thought it was over. Guess Henry hasn't given up yet. Honestly, she's pretty average looking. No wealth or connections. Is your mother-in-law okay with Henry still chasing after her? Ah, gossip. That's all this was. I replied, I have no idea. Henry and I don't talk much. Mimi Gray didn't believe me. He calls you second sister-in-law so respectfully in public. But is he really such a mess behind the scenes? Oh, he's more than a mess. The first time I had dinner with Thomas Davies's family, Henry showed up late, decked out in a biker jacket with flaming red hair. He didn't bother greeting the guests properly. And his gaze? Let's just say it screamed disapproval, like I had somehow hit the jackpot by marrying his brother. I've met plenty of people with attitudes like his in our social circle, and I prefer to steer clear of them. Why look for trouble when you can avoid it? It's not that Henry doesn't understand social etiquette. He just couldn't care less about what others think. But if he does care about someone, he's fiercely loyal. Wouldn't hesitate to go to extreme lengths for them. Unfortunately, I was just the villain in his story, so any goodwill was off the table. In one of my vivid memories, I had reached my breaking point and threw coffee on the heroine. Henry didn't care about his brother's opinion, though, honestly, Thomas probably didn't have much of an opinion about me at the time. Henry faked an injury report, fully intending to have me locked up. I didn't end up in jail, but what followed was worse. I met an untimely demise. Sure, the me from those memories deserved a slap, but nothing that extreme. After all, I wasn't even a top-tier villainess, just a minor annoyance. My crimes were limited to a few snide remarks and cold stares. I never plotted anything truly evil, let alone illegal. How had I ended up in a world where I scavenged through trash for food? All because I liked the male lead and dared to reach for what belonged to the heroine. The heroine, Clementine Taylor, had quite the hold on the Davies brothers. Edward, Henry, and even my husband, Thomas. She didn't even need to promise them anything. Yet they were all more than willing to stay loyal to her. But let's not kid ourselves here. Henry Davies's desires are one thing. But Thomas? He definitely has needs, and I seriously doubt he'd remain celibate for a woman he couldn't even touch. Yet somehow, this ridiculous scenario was playing out. Clementine had already dated Henry, and if she managed to win over the ever-distant Edward and turn the wild Henry into a puppy, it wasn't entirely out of the question that she could make Thomas a monk. And that, naturally, would drive me insane with jealousy. But seriously, what era are we in, where someone actually marries into wealth for love, and finds it? Such cases are rare, like finding a unicorn. Mimi Gray, clearly still running on her gossip high, sent another message. Breaking news. The rebellious heir kisses Cinderella passionately, because he suspects his own brother is after her. What? What? I sat up straight, my curiosity piqued. Tell me more. I knew you'd be interested, she teased. Apparently, Edward Davies was seen having dinner with that girl alone, and they were really hitting it off. Henry walked in and caught them in the act. I frowned. Edward's been on a business trip. This happened a few days ago. The pictures just got to me today. So the heroine had already crossed paths with Edward. But something still didn't add up. My mind had been slower than usual since my fall, but now the pieces were starting to come together. When Thomas finally finished work and came to bed, it hit me. Why would Clementine go through Joey to get a recommendation from Thomas when she'd already met Edward? It didn't make sense. The Davies group was one of the biggest names in Sea City. She must have known all about the family, especially since she dated Henry. Why bother sneaking through the back door to get into her ex's family business? What was she up to? Some master plan? Surely, she wasn't just trying to send me to an early grave. Of all the villainesses in these stories, why was I the only one destined for such a tragic end? Thomas climbed into bed and wrapped his arms around me, pulling me close. Not sleeping yet? His voice was tired. I leaned against his shoulder and showed him the pictures Mimi had sent. Do you recognize this girl? Thomas studied the photos for a moment before nodding. The one from the resume? Yep. Mimi says your brother dated her. And, Thomas pointed to the photos of Henry and Clementine locked in a passionate embrace. Does this look like a casual relationship to you? He had a point. I scrolled through my messages, showing him the latest. They're saying Henry got mad because he saw her having dinner with your older brother. What do you think? My brother. Thomas had the same question I did. So she knows both of them, but comes to me for a job recommendation? Maybe she's just really determined to get into your company? Thomas stared at me for a good 30 seconds, then reached out to affectionately ruffle my hair. We'll take you in for another checkup tomorrow. I glared at him. Are you calling me dumb? Of course not. My wife could never be dumb. Humph. He chuckled softly, planting a quick kiss on my cheek. Let's sleep. We'll deal with this tomorrow. He had a point. Why waste energy worrying about their mess? With that settled, I laid my head on the pillow and pulled up the covers. Thomas switched off the lights and, as usual, snuggled up close. He loved holding me while we slept, though I never found it comfortable. I'd protested countless times, to no avail. For a couple that was supposed to be married in name only, we certainly acted like something more. The next morning, a rare weekend when Thomas didn't have work, we slept in until the sun was high in the sky. Over breakfast, Thomas wasted no time calling Joey over. Is Clementine Taylor your friend? He asked, his expression as unreadable as always. Joey, sensing his serious tone, immediately tensed. Yes. She dated Henry? Joey's entire body went rigid, like a soldier standing at attention. They were together for a few years, but they broke up months ago. How long were they dating? Since Henry's junior year of college. So about 3 years. As Thomas peeled an egg for me, he continued, and what did she tell you about joining the company? Joey blinked, clearly not following. Tell me about what? About why she wants to work here. Joey began to speak quickly, as if worried that slowing down might make her seem suspicious. She said the Davies Group has always been her goal. She submitted her resume twice through the website but was rejected both times. Since I was working at the estate and overheard the eldest master and his father discussing the need for a new assistant, I thought it might be a chance for her. I asked if I could recommend a friend, and they told me to ask you, since you were in charge of the hiring. Joey looked genuinely flustered, beads of sweat forming on her forehead. She didn't seem to be hiding anything. Maybe she had acted on her own, without Clementine's knowledge. Thomas placed the peeled egg onto my plate, his voice still calm. Did she know Henry works at the company? Yes, but that's why she didn't apply to his department. Has my brother met her? Joey looked confused. I don't know. Clementine never mentioned it. Thomas shot her a quick, cool glance that made her straighten up even more, like a soldier being inspected by a commanding officer. And how did you two meet? We both went to see City University. She was a year behind me, and we were in the same student council. Clementine was hardworking, but she had financial difficulties. I sympathized with her and helped her out when I could. How much did Henry give her? Joey's face froze, anger flashing in her eyes. She quickly reined it in, but her tone grew stiff. My friend isn't that kind of person. Henry pursued her relentlessly. She had no intention of dating anyone while juggling school and work. Thomas chuckled. So my brother was shameless. Joey winced, the bravado gone. I didn't mean it like that. All right, one last question, Thomas said, wiping his hands with a napkin. How long did it take for Henry to win her over? Joey responded quickly. A month. Thomas leaned back, his voice laced with irony. A true case of persistence. Joey, sensing the sarcasm, stayed silent, lips pressed tightly together. True to his word, Thomas dismissed her after the final question, letting her return to her duties. I, on the other hand, was left feeling confused. That's it? You're done asking. What more do you want to know? I had a feeling he was hinting that I wasn't too bright. What did you get out of that? Nothing concrete yet. I still need to talk to Henry, see if their stories line up. So you're suspicious that Clementine deliberately targeted Henry? There are plenty of girls like her. I frowned. The heroine of a story is usually kind and sincere, not the type to play games. Thomas pushed a glass of milk toward me. Drink up. You need it. You're so annoying. After breakfast, Thomas went straight to his study to call Henry, and I had a feeling he'd call Edward next. Whatever his brother said must have irked him because when he came out of the study, his mood was noticeably darker. I didn't press him for details. But later that night, as we were getting ready for bed, he brought it up. Henry said he was the one who pursued her, and she never really wanted to be with him. Over their 3 years together, they fought constantly, broke up, got back together, and repeated the cycle. She told him it was exhausting, that he was too immature. Well, she wasn't wrong. I remembered Henry's red hair and awful social skills when we first met. I could only nod in agreement. As for my brother, Thomas continued, he said the dinner was a thank you gesture. His car broke down, and he'd left his phone at the office. Clementine happened to pass by and lent him her phone to call for help. Since it was lunchtime, he figured he'd buy her a meal as thanks. See, I knew it. A true heroine wouldn't resort to underhanded tricks. In my memories, Clementine Taylor had always been an ambitious and hardworking woman. Far better than someone like me, who was content to live a cushy, lazy life. If it weren't for the tangled mess of her love life, everything would have been perfect. But what could she do? Men couldn't seem to look away from her. Take Thomas Davies, for instance. He started off suspicious of her, but after confirming it was just a misunderstanding, his whole demeanor changed. Clementine Taylor's image in his eyes shifted dramatically, and just like that, the spark of love was there. Compared to Henry Davies, who was still immature, a girl like Clementine Taylor was better suited for men like Edward or Thomas Davies. Mature and grounded. If I weren't already occupying the position of Mrs. Davies, she'd probably lean toward Thomas. Sure, Edward Davies had all the right qualities, but his cold, distant personality didn't win him any points. I even remembered a time he went with Clementine to visit her parents, maintaining that icy demeanor, which certainly didn't endear him to his future in-laws. Sigh. I let out a long breath. Thomas's gaze shifted toward me. What are you sighing about? I just feel like things aren't easy for any of us. I was forced into marriage by family obligations, and Thomas had to marry for the sake of the family's interests. Clementine Taylor, focused on her career, never intended to attract so much male attention, yet here she was, entangled in a complicated web of emotions. And me? I had it the worst. After all, while Thomas might lose love, I could lose my life. Thomas didn't say anything, just gave me a strange look before peeling another egg for me. The misunderstanding had been resolved, and Clementine Taylor had smoothly secured her interview. Joey told me she performed exceptionally well and was even moving on to the second round. How many rounds are there? Just 2. Which meant the second interview would be with Thomas himself. The love story between the heroine and the second male lead was about to unfold. As I reclined on the rocking chair, enjoying the breeze, I let things play out naturally. There was no point in stopping it, and no reason to either. I didn't love Thomas Davies. I wasn't pining for Edward Davies, and I certainly wasn't going to flirt with Henry Davies or any of the other male leads yet to appear. Even if Thomas put divorce papers in front of me right now, I'd sign them without hesitation. Maybe just negotiate for a better settlement. Thomas wasn't stingy. He gave me a hefty monthly allowance and often surprised me with luxury gifts to keep up appearances of a loving marriage. Without the mess of romance, life was simple and free of drama. But just because I didn't seek out trouble didn't mean trouble wouldn't come to me. Privately, I'm a calm person, rarely confrontational. Hardly anyone ever tried to stir things up with me, except for Henry Davies, the reckless troublemaker. One afternoon, just as I was getting ready to head out for a tea gathering with my not-so-close friends, I opened the door to find Henry standing there, a pile of cigarette butts littering the floor at his feet. I made no effort to hide my disgust. At 22, he still had no manners. He didn't like me, and I didn't like him. We had been mutually repelled by each other for 3 years. He rarely bothered to come to my doorstep, so the fact that he was here, scowling, wasn't exactly a pleasant surprise. What do you want? I asked, my voice cold. Henry flicked away his cigarette, crushing it underfoot with unnecessary force. Where's my brother? He's not home. I know that. I'm asking you where he is now. How would I know? He's not a criminal, and I'm not his jailer. I don't track his every move. Henry's temper flared, and he punched the door behind me, the sound reverberating through the air. The door, of course, was fine. High-end, reinforced, and practically indestructible, But his knuckles weren't so lucky, with the skin peeling off. What a violent lunatic. He's the one who should be in jail. I gave him a shove, but the towering 6-foot-something didn't budge. I shoved again, and this time he took 2 steps back on his own. What the hell is wrong with you? Go get help if you're unwell. Henry must have realized he was overreacting because his tone softened a bit. Did my brother stay out all night? He did. Why? Do you even know what he's been up to behind your back? Building a relationship with a heroine, of course. What else? I looked at this impulsive young man and suddenly felt sorry for him. His ex-girlfriend broke up with him, but instead of moving on, he was stuck in this emotional rut for years. In our world, getting what you want is usually easy. Women flocked to him. What was so special about Clementine Taylor? Why couldn't he let go? But instead of the many women he could easily have, Henry got entangled with Clementine, and unfortunately for him, with both of his brothers. Things were bound to get messy. Henry wasn't like me. Money was my safety net, my peace of mind. But Henry, pampered and spoiled his whole life, had never had to worry about finances or his future. What he cared about was the intangible. Love, feelings, emotions. I patted his shoulder sympathetically. Sometimes you have to let go. Holding on will only hurt you more. Henry stared at me in shock. You know everything? Know everything? I've practically seen the future. I've already made my peace with it. Henry looked at me like I was a ghost. You're really not upset about any of this? Why would I be? I shrugged nonchalantly. Ever heard of a business marriage? You always thought I wasn't good enough for your brother, but in reality, it's because we come from similar family backgrounds that I became Mrs. Davies. Both your brother and I benefited from this arrangement. For people like us, profit comes first. Romance is for children playing pretend. It doesn't matter. Henry stayed silent for a long time. Does my brother know about this? He finally asked. Know what? Your thoughts. I sighed. Exasperated. It's something we both understand. There's no need to spell it out. Do you have someone else too? Not yet. But I'd never doubted my ability to attract someone new. I'm young, wealthy, attractive, and have a great figure. If I went looking for a guy, they'd line up to pay me. Henry was taken aback, staring at me as if I'd just said the most outrageous thing. You've grown up in this circle, so you must know how everyone lives, I continued, hinting at the obvious. It's common, and while I'm not saying it's right, if you insist on being with Clementine, do you think your parents or your grandfather will approve? Henry lowered his gaze, not answering. Your older brother's worked tirelessly for 8 or 9 years and is now a key figure in the family business. Your second brother, my husband, secured a marriage alliance and has several successful projects under his belt. What do you have to offer in comparison? I wasn't done. What's a girl like Clementine supposed to admire about you? Your temper? Your immaturity? I'm asking you, Henry. If you were competing with your brothers, what would you use to win? Do you think they'll just step aside because you're the youngest? Henry stood there, speechless. I shook my head, laughing. Don't be naive. Your older brother's a powerhouse who rarely fails. My husband's a smiling shark who's just as ruthless. You really think you can play on their level? Henry, clearly rattled, turned and bolted for the elevator, furiously jabbing at the button. My friends were texting, urging me to hurry up, so I casually swung my purse over my shoulder and walked over. Henry jumped away from me like a startled cat, barking, "Don't follow me!" I couldn't help but laugh, giving him the same disdainful look he had once given me. Don't flatter yourself. Why would I follow you? The elevator arrived, and I stepped in first. After a moment's hesitation, Henry followed, shrinking into a corner, trying to keep his distance. I ignored him, checking my nails instead. When the elevator reached the lobby and the doors slid open, there stood my husband, who hadn't been home all night. His eyes went from me to Henry, and his expression immediately darkened. I have an appointment, I said quickly, stepping out of the elevator. Thomas grabbed my arm but kept his gaze fixed on Henry. What did you say to your sister-in-law? Henry stepped out as well, but all his usual arrogance was gone. Still fuming, he muttered coldly. So, you've done something you're ashamed of, and now you won't let people talk about it? Typical Henry. Childish to the core. Thomas didn't lose his temper, but I could hear the edge in his voice. I told you it was a misunderstanding. If you don't believe me, ask Taylor yourself. He added with a biting tone, you don't have to trust me, but surely you trust her, right? After all, you love her so much. Henry clenched his fists, breathing heavily. I saw it with my own eyes. You two were hugging, laughing together. That was quick. Clementine had only been at the company for a few months, and already things had progressed to this? Thomas turned to me, his gaze steady. Do you believe him? I wasn't sure how to respond. We were just a surface-level couple. Did it even matter if I believed him or not? Henry, on the verge of tears, shouted, I saw it with my own eyes. I explained and you didn't listen, Thomas said coolly. Seeing is believing, Henry retorted, his voice trembling with emotion. Thomas let out a dry laugh. Well, I see you and your sister-in-law getting off the elevator together. Should I be suspicious of you two as well? He didn't wait for an answer, immediately dismissing the idea with a shake of his head. Of course not. I trust her. She doesn't like your type. That last comment seemed to hit Henry hard. His eyes filled with tears, and without another word, he stormed off, leaving the building. Aren't you going to go after him? I asked. Thomas shook his head. Let him cool off. He looked back at me. Who are you meeting? Just Mimi Gray and some friends. One of them just got back from abroad, so we're getting together. Can you cancel? Was this going to be one of those deep conversations about feelings? I had no desire to get involved in his family drama, so I quickly shook my head. No can do. I'm not someone who breaks her promises. Thomas gave a half-hearted smile, then took my hand. All right, I'll drive you there. The ride was quiet. Almost too quiet. I didn't ask any questions, and Thomas didn't volunteer any explanations. It wasn't until I was about to step out of the car that he grabbed my hand. Charlotte, do you trust me? The sincerity in his eyes made me hesitate. It felt almost cruel to say that I didn't really care. I trust you, I guess? I've never done anything to betray you, and I never will. Not before, not now, not ever. Oh, here we go. Why is he telling me this? And why does he look so serious about it? I scratched my head awkwardly. Thomas, do you remember that this is a business marriage? I'm not sure what part of that hit the wrong nerve, but the moment I said it, he froze, staring at me for a solid 3 minutes. From the moment we met today, his mood had been sour, and now it seemed to have hit rock bottom. Still, he didn't lose his temper. If he could hold his anger with someone as hot-headed as Henry, there was no reason he couldn't keep calm around me. After waiting a bit and seeing that he wasn't planning on responding, I unbuckled my seatbelt and got out of the car. The door slammed behind me, and through the half-open window, I noticed he was still staring at me. His gaze filled with something complicated. I couldn't quite figure out what it was. Disbelief? Sadness? Maybe even a little hurt? Men, they always want to have their cake and eat it too. Falling for another woman but still wanting me to keep up the perfect wife act. Thomas had always known how to get what he wanted. Now wasn't a good time for a divorce anyway. Both of our families had just announced a massive billion-dollar project. A sudden split would cast a shadow over the deal. Thomas wasn't like Henry, who would throw everything away for love. His career was his top priority. For the past 3 years, my life as a wealthy socialite seemed easy enough. Eating, drinking, and attending parties. But in reality, I wasn't just a trophy wife. The social circles I moved in were powerful, and those circles brought connections. Some deals were made not by the men in suits but by their wives in elegant gowns. Many deals were sealed through the social interactions of their spouses. Sometimes, a few words from me were enough to close a potential partnership for Thomas. Sure, the Davies family had a certain status, and I didn't have to go out of my way to impress anyone. But I still did my part, never letting my duties slip. For now, I was still the best choice to be Mrs. Davies. Thomas might have been intrigued by Clementine Taylor, but he wasn't at the point where she was indispensable. Someone from her background would need a lot of time and energy to navigate high society, learning how to smile while hiding daggers in her words. So it was no surprise Thomas didn't want me gone just yet. Once I worked out the logic, my restlessness calmed down. Don't worry, I said, trying to reassure him. At least for now, our goals are aligned. After all, I'd invested in a few promising projects under Thomas's guidance, and I wasn't about to walk away before the returns started rolling in. And divorcing someone from a family like the Davies was no small feat. It would take months, maybe even years, with all the elders involved, not to mention the division of assets. Thomas's expression grew even darker. His brow furrowed so deeply it could probably catch a fly between those lines. I waved him off and turned to leave. Charlotte Clark. He called me by my full name, something he hadn't done since we got married. Normally, it was just Charlotte, or even wife. I stopped instinctively, unsure why. Then his voice came out hoarse. Is your heart made of stone? I turned to look back at him, but he had already started the car and driven off. What did he mean by that? Was he upset because I wasn't acting like a jealous, raging wife? Did he think I didn't care about him and that hurt his feelings? Ha! What a joke. If most men in our social circle heard their wives talk the way I did, they'd be ecstatic, dreaming of it. But my husband? His brain works differently from the rest of them. Men like him, in the prime of their careers, are constantly surrounded by temptation. Sometimes they call it business networking. But who knows what really goes on? Just last night, Thomas didn't come home. He sent me a text saying he was working late. Then bright and early this morning, Henry shows up at my doorstep looking like a man betrayed, practically accusing me of not keeping a tight enough leash on my husband. If they weren't brothers, Henry would have probably punched Thomas already, with that short fuse of his. At least, that's what I was thinking. After my tea gathering, I took a cab back home, only to walk into a scene where Henry was nursing a bruised face, and Thomas sat on the sofa, his expression stormy. On the coffee table, a laptop was open, showing footage from the front door security camera. It was paused right at the moment Henry punched the door. Henry was now sitting on the floor, clearly humbled. When I walked in, he shot me a guilty look, glancing quickly at Thomas before standing up and bowing deeply to me at a full 90 degrees. I'm sorry, sister-in-law. I was an idiot. I shouldn't have raised my voice at you, shouldn't have acted violently, and definitely shouldn't have said those ridiculous things. I slipped off my shoes, planning to head upstairs. Next time, have your meltdown somewhere else. Henry rushed forward, blocking my way. I raised an eyebrow at him, and he quickly looked down, staring at the floor like a schoolboy in trouble. I talked to Clementine Taylor and checked the company's security footage. The floors had just been cleaned, and they were slippery. She lost her balance, and my brother only reached out to stop her from falling. As he spoke, Henry hurried to grab the laptop, opening another video file. Look, sister-in-law, I'm telling the truth. The security cameras caught everything. My brother steadied her and then let go. It didn't even last 10 seconds. How convenient. 10 seconds, and Henry managed to catch them in the act. I must have been too easy to read because Henry awkwardly ruffled his hair, looking embarrassed. I was too impulsive, he admitted. I saw them from a distance, jumped to conclusions, and lost my temper without understanding the situation. I'm sorry for the trouble I caused. I clicked my tongue. You really like that girl, don't you? You got jealous and kissed her after seeing her have lunch with your brother. Now, just a few days later, you're here throwing a fit again. Henry's apology grew even more sincere. I'm really sorry, sister-in-law. If it helps, you can hit me until you've let it all out. No thanks. The last thing I need is you fabricating some injury report and sending me to jail. I'm not the violent type, but thanks. I sidestepped him again, only for Henry to rush over and practically beg me to watch the rest of the footage. Reluctantly, I did. As he said, it was just an accidental touch. Nothing more than a moment of physical contact to prevent a fall. Henry's claim of them laughing and talking was simply Clementine thanking Thomas, and Thomas replying politely. How dense did you have to be to misinterpret that? For a brief moment, I considered inviting Henry to get his brain checked. Thomas remained silent the whole time. Ever since I walked in, he hadn't so much as glanced in my direction. Maybe he was still upset. Not that I'd done anything wrong. I was just telling the truth. If he couldn't handle that, how was he going to build a successful career? Henry, still unconvinced, clung to my sleeve, pleading. Sister-in-law, please don't let this cause any problems between you and my brother. If anyone's to blame, it's me. This guy was something else. Just this morning, I had explained everything to him, and it seemed like none of it had sunk in. Not only was he still blindly following Clementine Taylor, but now he was also playing the mediator between my marriage. I was too tired to deal with him. I nodded dismissively and gave him a light shove. This time, he obediently stepped aside. I'm going upstairs for a nap. If you two want to fight, take it outside and don't wreck the place. Henry nodded like a chastised child. Thomas didn't even look at me. It's always the quiet ones who get angriest, and Thomas rarely got angry. But when he did, he could really hold a grudge. I wasn't about to coddle him though. This was a misunderstanding, but in the future, who knows? One way or another, explanations would only last so long before we'd end up divorcing anyway. I was still young, and I wasn't interested in a tragic premature end in some remote town. Those memories, though not fully realized, were far too vivid for my liking. There was no one in this world, no thing worth fighting for, except for money. Maybe in time, Thomas would thank me for being such an understanding wife. It really was his good fortune. As I reached the second floor, I glanced back down. Thomas was staring at me again, with that same intense gaze. I forced a smile, trying to show him I wasn't bothered. From up here, I couldn't make out his expression, and he probably couldn't see mine clearly either. Whatever. I didn't bother straining my eyes and went straight to my room. Thomas still had work to do. After dealing with Henry, he packed his brother up and took him back to the office. I napped for about an hour before waking up to order fries and kebabs. Joey and the chef had already moved out, leaving the house empty, just the way I liked it. Alone, free to do whatever I wanted. No one to nag me. No one to bother me. Thomas didn't hover much when he was home either, but ever since the incident, he'd been more watchful, checking in on me from time to time. The laptop had been left behind in the living room. With nothing better to do, I booted it up and watched all the security footage Henry had mentioned. Then it hit me. Thomas must have overheard my earlier conversation with Henry. Oh well. If he heard it, that saved me the trouble of bringing it up. Some things are better left unsaid, but if you hint at them just right, they can save a lot of awkward moments down the line. Not long after, Mimi Gray messaged me, eager for gossip. What's going on between Henry and your husband? Did they fight? Look at these pics. Did your husband give Henry that bruise? Oh my God, girl, I feel for you. What's with that woman? Flirting with Edward and Henry wasn't enough. So now she's going after your husband too? How desperate is she? Seriously, is she trying to bag all three Davies brothers? Oh great. Here to rub it in. I couldn't help but think, what's so funny about this? You're just as much a side character in this mess as I am. Let's see how you laugh when Clementine hooks up with your crush. Things were escalating faster than I'd expected. In fact, Mimi's next message was about her so-called dream guy, getting friendly with another woman. The man who used to respond to her texts with a word or two every few hours was now glued to his phone, checking it obsessively. I laughed. I feel sorry for you. At least Thomas spoils me with gifts and money. What has your dream guy ever given you? A few eye rolls. Mimi was quick to recover. Ha! I wouldn't be caught dead with someone that oblivious. Sure. Keep lying to yourself. I know you're secretly heartbroken right now. Mimi Gray sent me a high-definition photo set. Check it out, my new target. Fresh out of the industry, a rising star. He's looking for a sponsor, and his rates are reasonable. Hee hee. I glanced at the photos. Yeah, he was a bit handsome. How much per month? I asked Mimi. She sent a smug emoji, arms crossed. Not too expensive. He's new, so he can't charge too much. 1 million a month. He's got a few teammates too, all priced around the same. Interested? I can hook you up. No thanks, I replied. I have a husband, and his looks and body are top tier. Mimi replied, jealousy dripping from her words. You're so lucky. Even in a business marriage, you managed to land Thomas Davies. My parents are setting me up with candidates lately. Ugh, don't even get me started. And just like that, the topic circled back around. So what's really going on between your husband and Henry? Did they really throw punches over a Cinderella? I wasn't about to air any dirty laundry, especially not to someone as gossipy as Mimi Gray. I fibbed. Henry disrespected me, and my husband set him straight. Yeah, right. Keep bragging. You wouldn't understand, being single and all. Having a husband who cares for you is a blessing. Mimi half-jokingly replied, mark my words, I'm taking screenshots of this. If Thomas ever cheats on you, I'll post this all over social media to roast you. Go ahead. I was unfazed. If he cheats, he better be ready to pay up big time. I'll take that fortune and sponsor my own pretty boy. You'll be green with envy. Mimi, like me, had a healthy appreciation for money. That shut her up, and she quickly shifted the conversation to, "Don't forget me when you're rich." Thomas, following his older brother's example, had been sleeping at the office for 7 days straight. No calls, no texts, as if he was determined to make me sweat. I didn't bother with him and just continued enjoying my peaceful life at home. Funny enough, when he was around, I hated how he clung to me at night, making it hard to sleep. Now that he was gone, I found myself missing that closeness. People are never satisfied. At another tea gathering with my girlfriends, Mimi brought her new boyfriend along. The photos had been polished to perfection, but in real life, he was a little underwhelming. His personality, though, was charming enough to keep Mimi smiling the entire time. As the event wrapped up, Mimi slipped a card into my purse, telling me to open it when I got home. She loved being mysterious, and I wasn't about to ruin her fun, so I nodded and played along. When I got home, I noticed a pair of Thomas's shoes by the door. Finally decided to come back. Huh? I wondered how things had progressed between him and Clementine Taylor over the past week. Even though Henry and I weren't exactly close, we had each other's contacts. He'd been posting on social media about working overtime lately, which was totally out of character for him. I figured it was his way of trying to win over Clementine. Thomas had been staying at the office, Edward was away on a business trip. It was the perfect opportunity for Henry to swoop in. Maybe Thomas had cooled off after our last conversation, realizing what a cooperative wife I truly was, and now he wanted to patch things up. I was wrong. About 99% wrong. Back in the master bedroom, I tossed my bag onto the vanity table, but it slipped and fell to the floor, spilling everything. Mimi's card skidded across the room, landing near the bathroom door. At that moment, the door opened, and out walked Thomas, shirtless, wearing a pair of loose gray sweatpants. He casually draped a towel around his neck and bent down to pick up the card. His face turned as dark as a storm cloud. My stomach dropped. Damon Lewis? He spat out the name, his eyes now fixed on me. I snatched the card from him and took a look. Great. It wasn't just any card. It was a half-revealing suggestive photo of a man. On the back, his name, number, and a teasing message. Miss Clark, I've admired you for a long time. Eagerly awaiting your response. Mimi Gray, you traitor. I clenched my fists in frustration, fuming as I stood there, my mind racing. Thomas leaned against the wall, arms crossed, his tone ice cold. Care to explain? This isn't mine. I threw the photo down in anger. I'm not interested in this kind of thing. Do you really think I'm the type to sneak around behind your back? I've always been upfront about everything I do. Thomas raised an eyebrow, his voice dripping with sarcasm. So you're saying if you ever step out, you'd let me know first? If you think it's necessary. I'd play along if that's what he wanted. But honestly, I wasn't craving anyone else. Thomas was more than enough for me. He wasn't happy with my answer, and he made it very clear. He rarely showed his true emotions, always keeping a calm, collected facade. Even when things went wrong at work, he never let it get to him at home. For 3 years, Thomas had never really shown any negative emotions in front of me. Not because he didn't feel them, but because he didn't want to. So now if I could sense that he was upset, it was because he wanted me to know. Suddenly, I felt a twinge of guilt and quickly changed my tone. Do you really think I'd cheat on you? Is that how you see your wife? How could you assume the worst about me? Thomas stared at me for a few seconds, not arguing back, then gestured to the photo on the floor. Where did this come from? A friend gave it to me. Which friend? I hesitated. Don't want to say? Why does it matter? Instead of answering, he threw another question at me. Where were you today? I had afternoon tea with friends. The usual group? Thomas raised an eyebrow. Was Mimi Gray there? Instinctively, I shook my head. Don't jump to conclusions. You don't even know them. Thomas was silent for a moment before asking, were there men at this gathering? A few. Some of them brought their boyfriends. Boyfriends? Thomas repeated the word with a mocking tone. Boyfriends who get a paycheck every month? I kicked the photo aside, not wanting to look at it anymore. Come on, Stuff like this happens all the time in our circle. Why split hairs? Was Damon Lewis there? No, he doesn't have a sponsor yet. One of his teammates came instead. I reiterated, I don't like these types. Their photos are all airbrushed and filtered. In real life, they're not nearly as good looking. Thomas latched onto a key part of my sentence. So if he was good looking in real life, you would like him? After 7 days apart, my husband had developed a knack for being a contrarian. There was no point in arguing back and forth. I linked my arm through his and gently led him out of the room. How long have you been home? Have you eaten yet? Thomas didn't resist, letting me steer him toward his study. I'm sure you still have work to catch up on. Better get to it now so you don't have to stay up late. I'll order us some takeout. What do you feel like eating? Whatever, he replied non-committally. All right, I'll figure it out. I'll take a shower first though. When the food arrives, you can get the door. I started to walk away but noticed Thomas following closely behind. I laughed and pushed him back toward his study. Stay here and work. I'll tell them to leave the food at the door and grab it after I'm done. Thomas, however, said, I need to shower too. You already showered. No, I didn't. I was about to when I heard you come in. Oh well, you can use the guest bathroom, I said, realizing he was still in a huff and deciding to give in a little. You take the master bathroom. I'll use the guest one. Thomas shook his head. Let's shower together. Wait, what? I said let's shower together. Thomas had definitely lied. I saw his discarded clothes in the laundry basket. He had clearly showered before I got home. But I let it go. As the saying goes, a fight between married couples should start and end at the bed. Thomas's mood had obviously improved, and I wasn't about to ruin it. He pressed his full weight against me as we lay on the bed afterward, making it hard for me to breathe. When I tried to push him off, he just bit my neck in protest. Stop moving. Let me hold you for a bit. You've been holding me for ages. Not long enough. I sighed in resignation. Thomas hugged me tighter. I spent a week sleeping at the office without you. I couldn't get any decent rest. I laughed. So what did you do before we got married? Thomas breathed in the scent of my hair, looking completely content. His entire body relaxed. Is it possible that he actually likes me? The thought startled me. My heart began to race, and I awkwardly pulled my arms away from around his waist. Thomas refused to let me go, sounding uncharacteristically needy. Hold me, Charlotte. I want you to hold me tight. Reluctantly, I put my arms back around him. No way. Thomas Davies likes me? I replayed everything in my mind. The way he had earnestly explained that he would never betray me. How he seemed hurt when he accused me of having a heart made of stone. The more I thought about it, the more it started to make sense. But if Thomas truly had feelings for me, how was the story supposed to progress? The hero belongs to the heroine, the second male lead is also hers, and so are the third, fourth, fifth. All of them are hers. None of them are meant to fall for another woman. And I'm just the evil supporting character. Did something go wrong in this story? Or is it me? With a head full of unanswered questions, I heard Thomas's soft voice in my ear. Honey, it's been a week since we last saw each other. Did you miss me? His tone was so gentle, so unfamiliar yet somehow familiar. I didn't want to ruin the peace we'd finally achieved, so I answered carefully, yes, I missed you. How much? Enough to lose sleep at night. Liar, he chuckled. I saw how well you were living without me. What do you mean? Without you here, I couldn't eat well or sleep well. I've been miserable. Then why didn't you text me? You were busy. He let out a low, amused sound, calling me a liar again. Charlotte, you can't do this to me, you know? His forehead rested against my shoulder, his breath warm on my skin. I'm a living, breathing person. I get hurt, I feel pain, and sometimes, I just wish you'd love me a little more. My heart raced faster, my face burning as a mixture of emotions swirled inside me. This was a business marriage, wasn't it? Love wasn't supposed to be part of the equation, right? And yet, that undeniable flutter in my chest wouldn't stop. To be honest, Thomas Davies is exactly the kind of partner I would have envisioned for myself. If we had started with a normal romantic relationship, we'd likely be the most affectionate couple right now. Thomas propped himself up, staring down at me with an intensity one wasn't used to. I thought he was going to kiss me, but instead, he gently stroked my head, his expression turning unusually solemn. How about we go to the hospital tomorrow and get your brain checked out properly, he suggested. What? I was taken aback. What kind of nonsense was this? How could he say something like that in a moment like this? I pushed him off me with a scowl, my eyes narrowing in irritation. I'm warning you, if you keep implying I'm stupid, I swear I'll stop talking to you. Besides, do your sentences even have any logical connection? Thomas lay back on the bed, extending his arm to pull me into his embrace. He sighed deeply, as if the weight of the world was on his shoulders. I've been thinking about it for days. Something's been off with you ever since you hit your head. Well, of course, anyone would seem strange if they suddenly had future memories flooding their mind. I didn't argue, just sighed along with him. You're not wrong. Something unusual has happened to me. I carefully chose my words, considering how to explain. Do you believe in people being able to foresee the future? Thomas didn't answer, and I didn't really expect him to. I continued, it might sound unbelievable, but we're living in a novel. Your eldest brother is the main character, Clementine Taylor is the heroine, you're the second male lead, and Henry barely scrapes by as the third. And me? I've drawn the short straw and been handed the script of the evil supporting character. Thomas still didn't respond, only reaching out to check my forehead, as if I were running a fever. I grabbed his hand, stopping him. According to the plot, Clementine Taylor will eventually dump Henry for good and start a romantic entanglement with you. But since you're already married, she'll reluctantly let you go out of moral principle. That's when your brother swoops in and wins her over. I sighed dramatically. During all this, she'll meet several other successful men who all fall for her, but she'll stick with your brother in the end. No harem, just a one-on-one romance. Thomas stared at me for a long moment before finally speaking. Have you been reading some kind of weird novel again? I knew you wouldn't believe me. I raised my hand in a solemn vow. I swear, I had no idea who Clementine Taylor was when these memories came to me. Thomas's face grew more serious. Go on. Well, after she marries your brother, both you and Henry willingly step aside, becoming her silent protectors, ready to clear any obstacles from her path. The other men do the same, ensuring she has a perfect life. Thomas, seeming uninterested in this part of the story, asked instead, what happens to you? I sighed, long and deep, before answering. I die. Thomas's arms tightened around me. And I die in a really terrible way, I added, my voice small and full of frustration as I sniffed, remembering my grim fate. In the story, I fall in love with your brother, but he hates me. So out of spite, I try to seduce Henry, but Henry humiliates me, says awful things, and even tries to send me to jail. I'm law-abiding, of course, so he doesn't get the chance. But by the time I've exhausted all my schemes, I try to return to you, only to find you've thrown divorce papers in my face. No matter how much I beg, you stay cold and indifferent. Thomas remained silent, gently rubbing my back as I spoke. We divorce, and when my parents find out, they're furious. They won't let me come home, they seize all my funds, freeze my bank accounts, and leave me completely destitute. I clenched my fist in the sheets, recalling the cruelty of it all. Everyone in our social circle laughs at me. I can't stay in the city, so I take what little I have left and move to some small town. But then I'm robbed of everything. All my jewelry and designer clothes gone. The police can't do anything. They say there's no security footage, no leads. I spend weeks starving, and eventually, I die in that dingy little apartment, I added, punching the mattress in frustration. And when I died, I was holding half a fried butter stick I'd pulled out of a trash can. I hated fried butter, but I was too stubborn to eat it, and I starved to death. Can you believe it? I refused to eat even when I was dying. Thomas couldn't help but chuckle. And then what? There's nothing more. I'm dead, so what happens next isn't really about me. I shrugged, but I went on anyway. Apparently, when news of my death reached the city, you all said I got what I deserved. No one came to see me, not even at the end. My family hired someone to take care of the remains, but they pocketed the money for my grave and scattered my ashes somewhere in the wilderness. When I finished, Thomas kissed my forehead. Poor thing. What kind of nightmare was that? He didn't believe me. I couldn't blame him though. It did sound far-fetched. If I hadn't experienced it myself, I wouldn't have believed it either. So, I wasn't angry. Instead, I simply declared, I'm only 23, I've got plenty of life ahead of me. I don't plan on dying anytime soon. I'll stay away from all of you, and if you ever want a divorce, just let me know. I promise I won't put up a fight. No divorce. Thomas took my face in his hands, looking deeply into my eyes. Charlotte Clark, no matter what you've forgotten, you need to remember this. We made a vow on our wedding day. We promised to stay together for life. I won't divorce you, and you're not allowed to bring it up again. Don't even think about it. A vow? Did we? The confusion was written all over my face. Thomas gently tucked a stray lock of hair behind my ear, his eyes misting over as he whispered, I'm sorry. I immediately responded, I don't blame you. He looked devastated, his voice thick with guilt. I should have been more careful. It's my fault you got hurt. It wasn't your fault. I wasn't paying attention. I should have noticed sooner. He kissed me again, this time softly on the lips, a tender gesture meant to soothe. Don't worry. We'll go to the hospital tomorrow. We'll get this sorted out. What did he mean by that? Did he think I wasn't okay? Well, I guess I wasn't exactly normal. Thomas took me to a different hospital the next day. The diagnosis? Memory confusion caused by a concussion. The doctor, pushing up his silver-framed glasses, explained calmly, this is uncommon. Concussions often lead to amnesia, with patients either forgetting the days surrounding the event or selectively erasing memories. Sometimes they lose all memory entirely. But Mrs. Davies' case of memory confusion? I haven't seen that before. I was completely lost. Thomas chimed in, she's been reading a lot of novels. Could that be related? He had already filled the doctor in on my tragic fate. The doctor nodded thoughtfully. There's a good chance. You might want to check her reading history. It could offer some insight. I wasn't sure if I was a fan of novels or not, but given my idle lifestyle, it seemed likely. The doctor was patient, methodically going through my reading list with Thomas. They skimmed most titles, only stopping to read a few summaries. Apparently, I had been a real online novel enthusiast before the accident. Finally, after nearly an hour, they found a book called The Rise of the Fallen Cinderella. When Thomas and the doctor read the title aloud, I couldn't help but cringe. Why did these novels always have such over-the-top names? Thomas and the doctor took their time reading through the chapters, and eventually, they found my character's debut in chapter 33. Charlotte Clark, the evil supporting character. Mystery solved. The doctor leaned back in his chair, analyzing the situation. Based on your reading history, it seems Mrs. Davies had just finished reading chapter 97 when the accident occurred. That's when the character Charlotte Clark died. The timing matches perfectly with the incident, and it seems you've conflated the story with your reality. But those memories had felt so real. I shook my head. It doesn't make sense. In my memory, the heroine's name is Clementine Taylor, and she looks just like Henry's ex-girlfriend. I had never even heard of her before. The doctor pondered for a moment. Perhaps you've seen or heard her name somewhere before the accident. Are you sure you saw her face clearly in your dreams? Now that he mentioned it, I wasn't so sure. The memories had only become clear after Joey handed me Clementine Taylor's resume. The doctor nodded. It's likely just a coincidence. In the novel, the heroine is involved with the three brothers at one point. It's plausible that the story's elements aligned with your life. I couldn't argue with that, but I pointed out another odd coincidence. But I have a friend whose love interest got involved with Clementine Taylor. I've never met the guy, but my friend is like a villainess in her story too. Her line follows the same pattern. The doctor asked, how did your friend describe this situation to you? She said her crush had started chatting with Clementine Taylor and they were getting close. Did your friend specifically say the name Clementine Taylor? I checked my messages with Mimi Gray, scanning through the chat. And no, Mimi had never mentioned Clementine Taylor's name. Maybe she just didn't know her name, I mumbled. The doctor suggested, you could ask your friend to confirm. Thomas added, Mimi Gray already knows what Clementine looks like. She sent you photos of her with Henry. If her crush was getting involved with Clementine, she would have said so. That made sense. I sent Mimi a message, asking if she had pictures of her crush's new romantic interest. Mimi responded immediately, sending a dozen photos taken from odd angles. The woman in the pictures was clearly not Clementine Taylor. I stared at the screen, my lips twitching in confusion. Meanwhile, Thomas and the doctor were deep in discussion about treatment plans. As expected, the doctor couldn't guarantee when or if my memory would return to normal. It might happen tomorrow, or I might live the rest of my life believing I was in a novel. There was no reliable cure. The doctor advised Thomas to talk to me about our past and take me to familiar places, which might help jog my memory. Before leaving, I asked one last thing. Doctor, before the accident, I hadn't even heard of the name Clementine Taylor. Are you sure the heroine in the novel isn't named that? The doctor shook his head. No, the heroine's name is Mary. She just happens to love Clementines. Really? The doctor smiled. It's a small world, Mrs. Davies. No kidding. The rain in Haiching had finally cleared up, and as Thomas and I left the hospital, a vibrant double rainbow stretched across the sky. Without asking, I could tell Thomas's mood was as bright as the rainbow. Following the doctor's advice, he took me to one of our favorite old restaurants for lunch. Do you remember? This is where we had our first blind date, he said, eyes full of hope as he waited for my reaction. I'm not suffering from amnesia, I reminded him. Thomas chuckled, his smile reaching his eyes. Then do you remember where we first met? I frowned. Wasn't it during the blind date? His smile faded. You really don't remember? Or are you just messing with me? I'm serious, I don't remember. His face darkened. Charlotte Clark, this isn't funny. Oh, this might be more serious than I thought. Maybe you should tell me what happened? I suggested cautiously. Thomas's voice was stiff as he replied, It was at your brother's birthday party. 5 years ago. Think about it. My brother's birthday? I remembered that, sure. You were there. How else would I have met you? I sucked in a breath. Are you telling me we've known each other for 5 years? He softened slightly. We weren't exactly close. I asked your brother to introduce us, but he said you just turned 18 and weren't interested in dating yet. Ah, now I understood. So you noticed me, but we didn't really meet. You talked to me. Did I? You did. His tone was so certain that I began to doubt myself, but I couldn't recall a single thing. I talked to a lot of people that night, I said sheepishly. Thomas's face tightened. Did our families have a close relationship back then? Why was my brother inviting you? The Davies family's roots were in Haiching, while the Clark family was based in Ungshi. We'd only started expanding into Haiching in recent years. Was it through my sister-in-law? I guessed, unsure. Thomas's disbelief was palpable. You don't remember even that? Your sister-in-law is related to a branch of the Davies family. She and your brother set us up for the blind date. I was stunned. Really? Thomas narrowed his eyes, recalling something. When you mentioned our marriage being just a business arrangement, did you really think we're only together because of family interests? Isn't that the case? I asked, bewildered. And when had my brother even gotten married? I couldn't remember any of it. He's been married for a while now. They have 3 kids. Weren't those kids illegitimate? Legitimate. I slammed my phone on the table in frustration. How could my brother do that? Married with kids, and he's still messing around outside? Thomas shook his head, laughing at my outburst. Your brother and sister-in-law are very much in love. Impossible. I crossed my arms, refusing to believe it. You take after your father, I muttered. He's got flags flying high at home and even more in the wind outside. The man gave me at least a dozen half-siblings. Thomas sighed deeply. If you said that to their faces, you might never be allowed back home. Humph. I don't plan on going back. I scoffed. Maybe you should. I think you need to have a conversation with your family. I froze. Is this part of the novel's plot too? Thomas nodded. My parents and my brother actually care about me? He nodded again. But if that's true, why didn't they visit me when I was in the hospital? Not even a phone call. They were there, watching over you for the first night. You woke up once while they were still there. Afterward, they left to ensure the evening party wasn't disrupted. Your parents are busy. Your father and brother are running businesses, and your mother was preparing for a new studio launch. Once they knew you were okay, they rushed back to Ungshi. They didn't want to disturb your recovery, so they asked me for updates every day. Thomas looked puzzled. Wait, you haven't contacted them in months? They didn't contact me either, I pointed out. They probably trusted my reports on your recovery and decided to focus on their work. He smiled softly. Your family doesn't really call much. They believe no news is good news, and only call in emergencies. I blinked, reflecting on how distant I'd been. It was true. My phone book was full of contacts, but I only ever really talked to Thomas and Mimi Gray. And Mimi had to reach out to me first. No wonder Thomas had to remind me to call my family. I sighed deeply. So much confusion from one little fall. Joey had returned to my side by this point. She was grateful that I had helped Clementine Taylor get the interview, and after learning about my condition, she became even more attentive. Thomas, busy as he was, couldn't always be around to accompany me, so he made a list of places for Joey to take me. But on our next long weekend, he personally took me back to Ungshi. Just as he'd said, my parents were happy together, my brother and sister-in-law were thriving, and their 3 kids were perfectly healthy and growing up well. As it turned out, Clark and Davies' first business collaboration had been agreed upon before Thomas and I had even met. My brother and sister-in-law had been the ones to suggest our match. The project wasn't massive but was ideal for the younger generation to manage. Thomas and my brother were given the reins. It seemed that Thomas had fallen for me at first sight at my brother's birthday party, but my brother, adamant about me being too young for a relationship, had refused to let him pursue me. He told Thomas to wait until I was 20. But on my 20th birthday, Thomas, eager as ever, asked my sister-in-law for help. She obliged, and with the approval of both families, arranged a formal introduction. Contrary to what I had believed, that was actually my first ever blind date. I'd simply mixed up the details in my head after my accident. And it wasn't a forced marriage either. After the date, I had genuinely liked Thomas. He would take me out often when I was studying at Haiching University, and our relationship grew naturally from there. On one romantic Qixi festival, Thomas had organized a sweet proposal. I didn't hesitate to accept, and soon after, our families were negotiating the wedding plans. Everything had been smooth and natural. Our marriage was just the cherry on top for our family's relationship, and everyone, including us, was happy with the match. The only issue, if it could be called that, was that after 3 years, there still hadn't been any children. But neither family was pressuring us. My parents were content with their 3 grandchildren and even encouraged me to take my time. They wanted me to enjoy my youth before being tied down with kids. On the Davies side, they weren't in a rush either. Edward, nearing 30, still wasn't married, and no one was pushing him. If there was anyone unsatisfied, it was me. I adored children, and though Thomas preferred to enjoy more time as just the 2 of us, I was eager to start a family. Thomas worried about being too busy with work to be a good father. Honestly, he'd probably rather keep all my attention on him, but he knew better than to voice it outright. We had both undergone health checks, and everything was fine. The doctor had simply explained that my body was too healthy, which could make it harder to conceive. Who knew being too fit could be a problem? After the accident, I'd been so focused on my survival and preparing for a potential divorce that I hadn't even considered children. Now, though, my perspective had shifted. I'd let nature take its course. One morning, Joey and I left the house right on time at 10 a.m. We had nearly checked off all the places on Thomas's list, and today's first stop was the Davies Group's headquarters. Despite my memory being a bit fuzzy, my life as a carefree housewife was very real. After graduating from university, I had married Thomas and told him I didn't want a regular job. I wanted to pursue my passions. He handed me his credit card and encouraged me to explore my interests, no matter where they took me. I'd tried a lot of things over the past 3 years, none of which had really panned out. Most recently, I'd been taking art lessons, with dreams of becoming an artist. I'd even reviewed my own artwork recently and realized they were nowhere near good enough to be called art. It was clear that I had been spoiled. I had never experienced the hard knocks of the real world, and Thomas had only indulged me further, leaving me unaccustomed to hard work. At the entrance of the company building, I called Thomas, and he came down to greet us in person. Joey asked if she could catch up with Clementine Taylor, and my curiosity piqued. I told Thomas to head back to his office. I wanted to see this Clementine Taylor for myself. To my surprise, she wasn't working with Edward Davies but was instead assisting Henry Davies. When Henry saw me, He walked over with long strides. "Sister-in-law, what brings you here?" Without waiting for my reply, he instructed his staff to prepare tea and snacks for me. Clementine Taylor, I realized, was much more attractive in person than in photos. She wore a matching custom ring with Henry, a sign that they had rekindled their romance. Looking uneasy, Clementine stood before me, wringing her hands. "Miss Clark, I'm really sorry for all the misunderstandings. Henry just wouldn't listen properly, and I've already scolded him for it. I hope you don't hold it against him." Her voice was soft and warm, and I immediately felt a pang of guilt for all the negative thoughts I'd harbored toward her. "It's all right," I said gently. "I share some of the blame too." I pressed my lips together and gave an awkward laugh. Back then, I was a bit out of it after the fall. I didn't know the full story and meddled by advising Henry to give up on you. Thankfully he didn't listen, or I would have felt like a villain. Clementine Taylor waved her hand dismissively. No, what you told him actually hit on something I'd been worried about all along. I mean, you've probably heard about my situation. The Davies family is so prominent. I never believed he'd choose me in the end." She looked at Henry, who nodded solemnly. "After your talk, he finally understood what was bothering me. He took me to meet his parents, and they were so kind. It eased my worries, and I decided to be with him wholeheartedly." Henry chimed in with his gratitude. "You scared me with all that talk about arranged marriages and hiring escorts. For a moment, I thought you meant it. I knew how much my brother loved you, and I felt terrible for him. Thinking back on it, I couldn't help but feel embarrassed, my cheeks heating up. I must have seemed heartless, like a thoughtless woman. No wonder Thomas had been so upset, even to the point of moving out of the house for a week." Henry noticed my discomfort and changed the subject. "How are you feeling lately?" "I'm doing better," I replied. I had spent the last 2 days thoroughly reading Fallen Cinderella Reborn as a beloved star. Though my memory still wasn't fully clear, I could now distinguish between the parts that came from the novel and reality. Everyone around me had been incredibly patient, answering any questions I had without holding back. After sitting with them for a while, I got a message from Thomas telling me to come join him. As I reached the door, Henry called out. "Sister-in-law, please be careful in the future," he said with rare seriousness. "You have no idea how worried my brother was the day you got hurt. I've never seen him so terrified. He was shaking, crying. He thought he was going to lose you." I had been unconscious that day, completely unaware of how things had unfolded. It was the first time anyone had told me about it. My relationship with Thomas was a bit strange. From everything I'd heard from him and others, it was clear how deeply he cared for me. Yet, I didn't remember any of it. I had spent 3 months seeing myself as the evil supporting character, holding my feelings for him at arm's length and always ready to walk away. Thomas, on the other hand, could recount in vivid detail how we met, how we fell in love, how our marriage blossomed. But none of it felt real to me. Still, he was exactly the kind of man I'd always wanted. It didn't take long for my feelings to grow, but it was clear we were out of sync. Sometimes, when Thomas would quietly stare at me, I could sense his dissatisfaction with my reactions. He'd share moments we had experienced together, and I'd vaguely remember them, but my lack of enthusiasm disappointed him. One day, while borrowing his phone, I saw a long list of search queries in his browser history. How to treat amnesia? How to recover lost memories? What to do when memory confusion persists after a concussion? Does hypnosis help restore memory? He had consulted several doctors too. Online consultations didn't give him many concrete answers, and when 2 of the doctors seemed overly pessimistic, he ended the conversation. Joey had mentioned that while I was resting in my room, family doctors would come to Thomas's office, spending at least an hour discussing my condition. It was clear he was desperate to bring me back to normal. Yet, in front of me, he played the role of the perfect husband, never letting his impatience show. Lately, with his work keeping him busy, we hadn't had much time to talk. Today, though, after bringing me to the office, he seemed in a good mood. During lunch, he gave me a tour of the company. Back in his office, I handed him the list. "We've nearly been to all the places you wrote down, but honestly, I don't think it's helping much." Thomas took the list, scanning it as he asked, "You're getting tired of it?" "Not interested in going anymore." He knew I liked to stay home. "No, it's not that. My memory issue isn't quite like amnesia. I haven't lost that many memories. They're just jumbled up. Revisiting familiar places isn't helping much. All right. He crumpled up the paper and tossed it in the trash. Then we'll stop. That wasn't really what I meant. I finished reading the novel, I added. Now I know what's real and what came from the story. He smiled weakly. Well, that's great, sweetheart. I'm saying, if I stay like this forever, you don't need to worry so much. The memory confusion doesn't interfere with my day-to-day life. You're working so hard already. You don't need to overwork yourself because of me. Thomas's smile faded. I don't like it when you're not fully well. But I'm not sick. Not being fully recovered is the same as being sick. This isn't something that can be fixed overnight. Thomas patted his lap, signaling for me to sit on him. He wanted to hold me again. When he was feeling insecure, that's what he needed most. Physical closeness. I sat on his lap, pressing against him as I gently patted his back, just like he often comforted me. Thomas, I love you. Please don't worry so much, okay? His voice was muffled as he spoke. You used to tell me you loved me. I quickly corrected myself. I love you. And you used to kiss me first. I kissed him on the cheek. See? I can still kiss you first. He let out a small, frustrated sigh. But you called this a business arrangement. Clearly, he was still bothered by that. I hit my head. And you said you wanted a divorce. I'll never say that again. We're going to be fine. Who else could I ever find besides you? Thomas huffed softly. Those friends of yours are always introducing you to men. Like I'd ever marry one of them. Oh. So if it wasn't one of them, you'd consider it? He teased, jealousy dripping from his voice. Bringing home pictures of other men. I never knew you had it in you, Charlotte Clark. That was a low blow. Mimi Gray shoved that in my bag. If I'd known, I wouldn't have taken it. Besides, that guy was wearing underwear. It wasn't like it was a nude photo. He raised an eyebrow. A guy? He didn't look that young to me. Well, he's a bit younger than us. They're part of a boy band. Just debuted. They can't be too old. So now I'm old, huh? He tightened his grip around my waist. I'm 25. That's not old. Who said anything about him being old? I stroked his hair, mirroring the affectionate tone he often used with me. If someone's got a problem, they should seek treatment, okay? No hiding it. Thomas finally let out a laugh, pulling me closer as he leaned back into the chair. I watched the security footage of you talking to Henry, he said after a moment. I know. When I came home that day, you were watching it. I watched it a lot. At the time, I didn't know it was post-concussion confusion. I thought maybe you'd been pretending for the last 3 years, and your conversation with Henry convinced me. You were so serious, so convincing. And you believed it? I was torn. My mind was all over the place. But then when you came home, you didn't even say a word to me, like you were confirming it all. No wonder the earlier doctors hadn't caught on. My case had been so strange, the scans showed nothing. I barely slept that week at the office, Thomas admitted. My brother had to sit by me until I fell asleep just to make sure I didn't pass out. He kept questioning me, trying to figure out what was going on. When I told him, he was much calmer than me. He was the one who suggested I take you to another hospital for a second opinion. Even his brother had been involved? And you, Thomas continued, were out having fun, bringing strange men's cards into the house. That hadn't been intentional, but I could see why it upset him. Mimi had slipped it into my bag, and I'd forgotten about it right away. If it hadn't fallen out, who knew when I would have found it? I was really mad then, he confessed, a smile tugging at his lips. But when you reached out to me, asking if I'd eaten, all the anger melted away. You're easy to please. He shook his head. No, it's just that I love you too much. Thomas didn't often express his love in words. He preferred to show it through his actions. For him to say it out loud like this was rare. Maybe I'd forgotten some things, but I knew this about him. He might pout now and then, but he rarely let himself be vulnerable. He wasn't the type to openly ask for comfort, except for moments like this, when he truly needed reassurance. I hugged him tighter, sighing inwardly. How did I manage to mess things up so much? It had been my own carelessness. On such an important occasion like our anniversary, I'd worn high heels that didn't fit right, stumbled down the stairs, and landed in this mess. No one had blamed me, of course, I was the one who got hurt. But I couldn't shake the bad timing of it all. Just before the fall, I'd been reading that ridiculous novel. Of all the coincidences, the author had to name the villain after me. The room grew quiet for a few minutes. Thomas, exhausted from his work and the emotional strain, closed his eyes, still holding me close. I considered letting him rest for a while longer and started to get up. But the second I moved, his eyes snapped open, and he pulled me back down. "Where are you going?" "I thought you might want to lie down in the rest area for a bit. You still have half an hour before your meeting. Stay with me." I wasn't tired. I'd slept in until 9 that morning. But seeing the dark circles under his eyes, I couldn't say no. "All right. My husband loves me too much. What am I supposed to do?" After he left for his meeting, he asked me to wait in the rest area so we could go out to dinner afterward. With nothing else to do, I texted Mimi Gray to tell her about the situation. She replied with a long string of ellipses. "The guy I've been hanging out with is literally lying on my bed, so please, spare me the romance talk." "Wait, so the memory loss is real," she added. "Technically, it's more like memory confusion, but yes, I've lost a few memories." Mimi shot back. "I swear you're one of a kind. Why did you even insist on wearing those shoes? Didn't I tell you they were hard to walk in? I won't be wearing them again. Honestly, they're not even that cute. They nearly killed you. You think they're going to look good after that?" A few minutes later, Mimi Gray sent me a long message. "Is it really surprising that Thomas Davies reacted the way he did? You were completely unconscious that day. No matter how much we called your name, you didn't respond. The Davies family villa is way out in the suburbs, and it took time for the ambulance to get there. We didn't dare move you ourselves." Thomas Davies, usually so composed and confident in business, looked absolutely lost. Honestly, I've known him for years, and that was the first time I saw him so panicked. He was crying, calling your name over and over like you were already gone. For a moment, I thought if something really happened to you, he'd follow you out of grief. I didn't realize Mimi Gray had been there. It seemed like she understood the depth of Thomas and my relationship far better than I had. Back when we were chatting, I mentioned that Thomas and I had a marriage of convenience, but you didn't correct me, I replied. Mimi fired back in frustration. "You say the wildest things when you're in a mood. And you handed me that little card, which Thomas saw. That's not the first time." "Wait, what?" My jaw dropped. "Impossible. Thomas said we've always been deeply in love, that I would never do something like cheating." Mimi couldn't take it anymore and sent a voice message. "Girl, you've always had a lot of admirers. There are plenty of young celebs out there who'd kill for someone like you to support them. The guys we hang out with have their own little networks, and once someone connects, they love to help each other out. We agreed you'd just take their contact info as a formality and forget about it afterward. It's nothing serious. They ask, we humor them. I didn't know you were having memory problems." I asked her about the rumor she'd mentioned, the one involving my husband and Clementine Taylor, where she joked about Clementine not leaving even married men alone. "That was just gossip. You know how things go in our circles. Rumors fly all the time. I didn't mean anything by it." Typical plastic friend behavior. Making jokes about something so sensitive. At least your husband loves you. Do you know how rare real love is in our circles? If you feel bad about it, maybe be a little nicer to him. You didn't forget his birthday's next month, right? Her question caught me off guard. I paused, thinking hard. Then the date popped into my mind. Thank goodness. I let out a breath of relief. Mimi's reminder was timely. I hadn't even thought about getting Thomas a birthday present yet. Thomas and I are both practical people. In previous years, he gave me luxury items that would appreciate in value, and I gave him gold bars, which was equally sensible. He'd never complained, so I assumed he liked them. But this year was different. I wanted to give him something special, something that would truly make him happy. The problem was, I had no idea what that would be. Thomas always struck me as someone who valued his career above all else. He thrived on the challenges of the business world. And while I might not have been actively contributing to his success, I certainly wasn't a burden either. Marrying me had given him both a partner and a boost in his career. Our family's business ventures were handled by my father and brother, so I had little involvement. If I suddenly decided to get involved in a project to surprise him, It wouldn't make sense. As for investments, it was Thomas who had always guided me in that department. Giving him money was even more absurd since I relied on the allowance he gave me each month. That evening, Thomas came home on time. He had made reservations at a restaurant near his office. Seeing the troubled look on my face, he asked with concern, "Are you feeling all right?" I toyed with my fork, deciding to stop overthinking and get straight to the point. "What do you want for your birthday?" Thomas, clearly used to my bluntness, didn't even raise an eyebrow. "My birthday's still a month away." "Exactly, it's next month. You usually wait until the day before to pick up some gold at the bank." I awkwardly smiled. "I want to get you something nicer this year." "I don't think you'll find anything better than gold," he said, half serious. Gold certainly had its merits, but I couldn't help rolling my eyes. "How shallow, letting money cloud your vision." Thomas smirked. "I meant that with your love for wealth, I doubt you'd consider anything else to be worth giving." I stared at him, realizing he was poking fun at me. As someone who had never wanted for anything, it was odd that I'd become so fixated on money over the years. The steak arrived, and as usual, Thomas cut mine into neat pieces before passing the plate over. Suddenly he said, "There is something I really want." My eyes lit up. "Tell me. I'll tell you when we get home." He was being secretive, making it sound like something truly important. The moment we walked through the door, I eagerly asked him what it was. Instead of answering, he slipped into his study, closing and locking the door behind him. 5 minutes later he came out, holding a single sheet of A4 paper. Thomas had practiced calligraphy as a child, and the elegant strokes on the page were bold and refined. It only took me a moment to read the contents. Party B promises never to divorce Party A. Party B promises never to betray Party A. Party B promises never to leave Party A. He had already signed under the Party A section. As expected, all the responsibilities fell on my shoulders. I glanced up at him. "This isn't legally binding, you know." "I know." He handed me a pen. "But I trust you to keep your word." That was the same reasoning I'd used to brush off Henry Davies when he'd come to my door, all worked up. I wasn't sure if Thomas was teasing me or trying to make a point, but since this was what he wanted, I signed it without hesitation. Thomas looked as if he had just won a treasure, carefully storing the paper in the safe. I couldn't help but laugh. "You're acting like a high schooler in love." He gave me a long look and replied in a calm tone, "And that's why you can't see the value in anything beyond gold. It's just a piece of paper." He feigned surprise. "Did you just compare your heartfelt promises to a piece of scrap paper?" I let him have the last word, knowing it made him happy. When his birthday finally rolled around, I still ended up buying 10 gold bars and left them on his desk. That piece of paper, though, seemed to be truly special to him. Afterward, he stopped consulting doctors about my memory or dragging me around to places from our past. Since I'd figured out that he wasn't some tragic, unrequited love-stricken second lead, I was more than happy to grow closer to him. Our relationship deepened naturally. By the time we scheduled a checkup before the Lunar New Year, everything felt right. Since I was married and my period had been late by a few weeks, the doctor suggested I take a pregnancy test first. I had gone through this routine before and didn't think much of it, but when the results came back, both Thomas and I were completely stunned. I was pregnant. The child we had been hoping for over the past 3 years had finally taken root. Thomas had always said that it didn't matter whether we had kids or not, but his joy was unmistakable. That very afternoon, the news spread like wildfire among our friends and family. Even though I was still in the early stages and my belly didn't show, Joey was brought back from the old family estate. Though she didn't have any experience with pregnancy, her role was to supervise the new housekeeper and keep me company. Henry Davies and Clementine Taylor brought over a batch of nutritional supplements to celebrate. Since Henry had gotten back together with Clementine, he'd calmed down quite a bit. He wore tailored suits now, slicked back his hair, and carried himself like a grown man. He had even brushed off the fact that Thomas had hit him, making light of the situation as he joined his brother in the study for some brotherly bonding. Clementine and Joey stayed with me in the living room. Joey hinted that Henry and Clementine's wedding was just around the corner, and even Edward seemed to have some developments on his end. The Davies family was on a roll with good news lately. Clementine had heard about my memory issues but hadn't found a good time to bring it up. Today, she couldn't resist asking for more details. I told her everything, and both she and Joey burst into laughter. It's just too perfect. The villainess has your exact name, and the heroine loves Clementines, Joey said between giggles. And that's not all, I added. The heroine is tangled up with the 3 wealthy brothers, just like you were with the Davies brothers. Clementine wiped away tears from laughing. So that's why you told Henry all those things. You really thought I wouldn't choose him in the end, and you were trying to help him cut his losses. I awkwardly scratched my nose. I figured, why make things harder for the side characters? He looked like he was about to cry. I couldn't stand it. The 2 brothers emerged from the study just in time to overhear that last part. Henry, who used to be so prickly around me, was now perfectly comfortable chatting. Sis, you really tore me down that day. I'd been working at the company for a year, finally starting to feel like I wasn't completely useless, and then you come along and make me question everything. In hindsight, my words had been pretty harsh, nitpicking at all his flaws. Sorry about that, I apologized. But Thomas, who had been massaging my shoulders, chimed in. What are you apologizing for? He deserved it. Henry, surprisingly agreeable, nodded. He's right. I was a jerk, and you had every reason to call me out. I wasn't used to him being this well-behaved. I turned to Clementine. So, when you insisted on working at the Davies group, was it really because of this idiot? Clementine blushed and nodded. I was doing fine at my old job, but a senior at the company told me that Henry had been in a bad place since our breakup. Smoking and drinking non-stop. I've never met anyone who treated me as genuinely as he did, so I didn't want to see him fall apart. Henry, feeling triumphant, raised his chin. You just couldn't let go of me. I still found the whole thing surreal. It's funny because, in my dreams, I saw you just graduating this year. When I read the novel, the heroine was still in school. Henry guessed, maybe you saw it in my social media? During Clementine's finals, I posted almost every day to cheer her on. Your way of cheering people on is unique. I didn't mean to show off, but I couldn't help it. Well, your brother and I never flaunt anything like that. Henry shot a glance at Thomas. That's because he's terrified someone will steal you away. He'd rather keep you hidden than parade you around. That wasn't true. And besides, I wasn't one to flaunt my relationship. After our guests left, Thomas helped me back to our room for a nap. Ever since my fall, he had insisted we set up a bedroom on the ground floor, not wanting me to risk the stairs again. I didn't mind. Another tumble could be far more serious now that I was pregnant. I had to be extra careful for the baby's sake. But Thomas was overly cautious. Even for a short walk, he insisted on holding me. He tucked me in, pulling a chair next to the bed. It looked like he planned to stay until I fell asleep. Relax a bit, honey. You're too tense, I said, shaking my head. Thomas smiled softly. I'm not tense. I just want to take care of you. I rolled onto my side to face him. Do you really love me that much? Gently brushing the hair from my forehead, he asked with a smile. How would you like me to answer that? I don't want some cliché answer. I'm just curious. What made you fall in love with me? Was it love at first sight? He paused thoughtfully. You're young, rich, beautiful, and have a killer figure. I bet if you hired a male escort, he'd probably pay you instead. Wait. Hadn't I said those exact words to Henry Davies that day? I shot back. Is it really manly to be so petty? Thomas Davies said nothing, just smiled as he adjusted the air conditioner with the remote. I slept until I woke naturally, and when I checked the time, it was already 4:30 in the afternoon. Thomas wasn't in the room, likely working in his study. Why didn't he wake me up? Sleeping this much during the day would only mess with my sleep tonight. I grabbed my phone, only to find that all my alarms had been turned off. Joey was in the living room, supervising the cleaning staff. When she saw me, she walked over and asked, Madam, the second young master received a last-minute notice and went to the office for a meeting. Got it. He had the chef prepare some of your favorite dishes. Would you like to eat now, or later? I'm not hungry yet. I'll eat later. Of course. Let me know if you need anything. I waved her off. No need. You all carry on. I'll head to the study to find something to read. These days, I don't read online novels much anymore. Too many bad memories attached to them. The study has a collection of classic literature, and occasionally, I'll pick something up to read. It's good for the soul. Once inside, an impulse struck me. I suddenly wanted to see how much Thomas had stashed away in his little gold vault over the years. He always said everything was our joint property, so the safe's password wasn't a secret to me. When I opened it, the first thing that caught my eye was that childish contract we'd signed. A playful promise on a scrap of paper. I picked it up, noticing something was off about the texture. My fingers brushed the edge, revealing a second piece of paper beneath it, aged and yellowed. The handwriting was messy, sprawling across the page. I, Charlotte Clark, promised to marry Thomas Davies when I grow up. The clumsy writing looked vaguely familiar, like something I might have scrawled. Back in elementary school, I'd taken calligraphy lessons. While my writing wasn't especially beautiful, it had a neat, upright quality. Had I really made such a promise to Thomas? I had no memory of it. What a schemer he was, even as a child, already securing his future wife at such a young age. I couldn't help but laugh at the absurdity of it all. I snapped a picture and sent it to him. He was probably still in his meeting because he didn't reply for half an hour. When he finally did, his response was dripping with nonchalance. I thought you'd only find that when you were sorting through my belongings after I died. This is your personal safe. If you didn't want me to know, you wouldn't have put it in such an obvious place. His reply was smug. Of course you wouldn't remember. I'm not surprised. I was a kid. You can't expect me to remember everything from my childhood. I can. The confidence. Wait, we met when we were kids? Figure it out. If I could figure it out on my own, why would I be asking? Since he was busy, I let it go. At 7 p.m., Thomas came home for dinner. I asked him again at the table, but his expression was that of a long-suffering husband. The way he looked at me was full of exasperation. I got up and pulled out a few of my medical reports. Mr. Davies, remember your wife has post-concussion memory issues? If you didn't remember, then neither do I. Maybe I do remember. It just hasn't come back to me yet. His expression said loud and clear, yeah, right, I believe you. I rolled my eyes and pretended I didn't care. Fine, don't tell me. I'm not that curious. Thomas wasn't fooled, burying himself in his meal without a word. The more he kept quiet, the more I wanted to know. Maybe it was the look in my eyes that finally broke through his stubborn heart. Later that night, after the lights were off and we were both in bed, Thomas began to speak. My grandparents lived in Ungshi before they immigrated, in the same neighborhood as the Clark family. I lay there in the dark, ears perked up. When I was young, my parents and I often visited them. Your neighborhood didn't have many kids, and your brother didn't like playing with you. That was true. My brother was 5 years older than me. By the time I was old enough to remember things, he already had his own group of friends and didn't want a little sister tagging along. We ran into each other a few times at the neighborhood playground, Thomas continued. You figured out that I'd play with you, so you started coming to find me every day to play house. I wasn't pleased with his phrasing. What do you mean I dragged you into it? You were only 2 years older than me. You were probably just as into playing house. Nope. I never liked it. Alright then. Honestly, I couldn't imagine Thomas Davies ever playing house. And then, you told me you really liked me and that you'd marry me when you grew up. 3 reallys? Wow, I must have been quite forward as a kid. That note you found? It was your marriage promise. You hadn't even started school yet, so I taught you how to write the words in the sand. Sounds like you tricked me into writing it. I told you we were too young to talk about marriage, but you cried your eyes out and wouldn't let go of my leg. You're lying. I was such a proper little lady back then. I wouldn't have done that. Thomas let out a deep sigh in the dark. Denying the truth, Charlotte Clark? You really are a coward. Reverse psychology won't work on me. I'm just telling it like it is. Well, I refuse to accept it. Thomas chuckled softly. You're telling me you weren't tempted? All those months we spent together, and you didn't feel anything for me? I was the second male lead, and you never thought about making the first move? Securing me would have been smarter than getting a divorce. I shook my head, amused. Love is one thing, but my life's at stake here. He chuckled again. Since when are you so careful about your life? When I told you to watch your step before the banquet, you didn't listen. Don't remind me. I've regretted it ever since. Thomas shifted closer, carefully wrapping an arm around me. Promise me you won't get hurt again, okay? You clumsy idiot. This was clearly something that weighed heavily on his mind. I reached up, cupping his cheek. Stop worrying. I'm fine now, aren't I? He grumbled. You call memory loss being fine? I'm still alive and kicking, aren't I? I took his hand and placed it on my belly. I'm healthy, and I'm going to be a mom soon. Pregnancy is going to be hard. I know. So let's just have this one and be done, okay? I'd always liked kids, but it wasn't about having many. One would be enough, and we could give them all the love and attention they needed. Then you'd better be responsible for birth control. I will. I'm not taking any pills. Thomas's hand gently rubbed my belly. Pills are bad for your health. You're not allowed to take them. That was one thing I loved about him. He truly cared about my well-being. Some men only cared about themselves, completely disregarding the toll it took on their partners. I tilted my head up and kissed his chin, which made Thomas laugh. He lowered his head, and this time, our lips met in a kiss that tasted like fresh mint. He didn't smoke or drink, so the only scents on him were from his shampoo and body wash. After a while he pulled away. I made a small sound of confusion. He said, "No more. Time to sleep." I understood immediately and wriggled out of his embrace, rolling back to my side of the bed. These days, we couldn't sleep wrapped around each other. Too risky with the baby. Thomas lay next to me for a while before throwing the covers off and getting up. Go ahead and sleep. I'm going to take a shower upstairs. There's a bathroom in this room. I don't want to wake you. I'm not even tired yet. Thomas hesitated for a second, then decided against going upstairs. Before he headed into the bathroom, he turned the light on for me so I wouldn't be stuck in the dark with my phone. When he came back to bed, his skin still damp from the shower, he lay down beside me, facing me but keeping a safe distance. Do you know why I made you write that promise? He asked. I was wide awake now, curiosity piqued. Why? You wouldn't tell me before. Because of the marriage promise you made when you were little. There was a playful smile on his face, that same devilish charm that could be dangerous. I figured that since you promised to marry me back then and actually became Mrs. Davies, if you promised to stay with me forever, you wouldn't break your word. I laughed. You're just as childish as Henry. Thomas took my hand in his, holding it gently yet firmly. His touch spread warmth through me, and I felt my heart beat faster. My cheeks flushed, and I instinctively looked away from his intense gaze. Thomas chuckled. After all this time, why are you still getting shy? We've only been married 3 years. But I've loved you much longer than that. Feigning disgust, I made a face. You fell for me when I was a kid? That's messed up. Thomas laughed heartily, squeezing my hand. What are you thinking? You were already 18 when I saw you at your brother's birthday party. Still, 5 years isn't that long. 5 years isn't long? I scooted closer to him, more serious now. No, it's not. Thomas raised an eyebrow, and I smiled at him. We've still got so many more 5 years ahead of us. His expression softened, and he leaned in, pressing his forehead against mine. You've learned a thing or two from all those novels you've been reading, he teased. That was beautifully said. When have I ever said anything you didn't like? Never. Then we're good, right? Thomas was clearly satisfied, pulling me into another hug. Yes. We've got so many more years ahead of us. I patted my chest. Don't worry. I'm a woman of my word. Extra. Thomas Davies's perspective. Hey, are you busy, hubby? I have to show you something. Haha, this is hilarious. Charlotte Clark's message popped up on my phone just as I stepped out of the meeting room. Walking toward my office, I opened the image she'd sent. It was a screenshot of a ridiculous passage from one of those cliched romance novels where the overbearing CEO falls madly in love with the heroine. She loves reading those absurd stories, saying they're mindless entertainment, perfect for killing time. Her other favorite hobby is sharing the most outlandish moments with me, usually along with some sarcastic commentary. She knows I don't have much free time, so she always cuts straight to the highlights. In this particular screenshot, she had circled the words, 5 million, in bright red. Apparently, the plot involved some super wealthy male lead going to war with his own brother over a $5 million deal. This is too funny. I couldn't wait another minute to share it with you. Aren't I the best? I could picture her face, those sparkling eyes, her grin brimming with mischief, and couldn't help but smile. I teased her back. You should stop reading these. They're not good for your IQ. She replied with a pouting emoji. Nonsense. I've only heard of people getting dumber from hitting their heads, not from reading novels. She had a point. As it turned out, no amount of warnings from me could prevent her from taking a bad fall, one that left her with a concussion and some lingering side effects. After spending 2 days in the hospital, throwing up into a trash can, the doctor finally cleared Charlotte for discharge. I took her home, but her first order of business wasn't resting or recovering. It was checking on her precious gold stash. I caught her crouching stealthily by her safe, counting and recounting the gold bars inside before breathing a sigh of relief. What a money grubber. Even after an injury, her priority was ensuring her gold was safe. But seeing her act like her old self again brought a sense of calm back to me. I had originally taken time off to stay by her side, but Charlotte, in her typical no-nonsense fashion, waved me off. Go to work. You can't support me if you don't earn a living. She always referred to herself as a freeloader. In her mind, anyone not working a 9-to-5 must be a leech. The truth is, over the past few years, she's been far from idle. She's invested with me and co-founded an art gallery with one of her friends, which is now managed by an agent. All she has to do is sit back and watch the money roll in. I double-checked, but she was firm. I had a critical project to handle, so I returned to the office. Life resumed its usual rhythm, and everything seemed to be going back to normal. But then I noticed something odd. Charlotte wasn't sending me her usual stream of novel excerpts anymore. When I asked her why, her expression flickered in a way I couldn't quite read. Only later did I realize she must have been thinking, why bother reading novels when we're already living in one? At the time, I brushed it off, not realizing something was seriously off. My youngest brother, Henry, is another story. He's impulsive and hot-headed, always charging into things without thinking. My older brother and I have talked to him countless times, but he only changes a little. One day, I ran into his ex, Clementine Taylor, at the office. Just as she was about to trip, I instinctively reached out to steady her, memories of Charlotte's own fall flashing through my mind. Clementine thanked me, her voice cautious, and asked if I was okay, noticing the tension in my face. Before I could respond, Henry appeared out of nowhere, yanking Clementine behind him, glaring at me but too scared to say anything. He's always been quick to anger, but he knows better than to cross me or my older brother. We don't hesitate to put him in his place when necessary. It was an accident, I explained calmly. She nearly fell, so I helped. Henry, still not convinced, muttered, You think I'm an idiot? I didn't bother responding. Arguing with him while he was in such a foul mood was pointless. I had work to do and left them to sort it out. Later, I overheard Henry accusing Clementine of scheming to get close to his 2 older brothers, calling us cunning old foxes who would chew her up and spit her out. That little punk. He had the nerve to run his mouth, but I let it go. What really blindsided me was when he took his accusations to Charlotte. And what shocked me even more was that she didn't care. Instead of being outraged or upset, she shrugged it off, saying we were just in a marriage of convenience. When I confronted her, she showed no signs of jealousy or anger, just a casual indifference, which wasn't like her at all. Charlotte isn't one to cause scenes, but I'd have expected at least a question or two if she thought her husband was cheating. It was then that I realized something was seriously wrong. She dismissed me, saying she had plans with her friends. Was she deliberately ignoring me to make a point? I drove her to meet them, but the entire ride she was glued to her phone, not bothering to talk. She seemed to believe Henry over me, which stung more than I'd like to admit. 3 years of love, undermined by a few careless words from my brother? Reality was harsher than I thought. She didn't just believe Henry. She thought she was living out the role of an evil supporting character. At first, I didn't take her seriously. My wife has always had a vivid imagination, but the way she told her story, with such conviction, forced me to reconsider. It was ridiculous yet strangely coherent, full of detailed accounts, including her distaste for fried butter. Charlotte's never liked fried butter. Even in her imaginary narrative, she was cursing herself for being picky about food, even in the face of death. I sighed and decided it was time for another trip to the hospital. The diagnosis this time? Memory confusion. It made far more sense than memory awakening. Charlotte, relieved to escape her self-imposed fate as an evil supporting character, seemed to improve quickly. But I wasn't doing so well. Sure, she was still my wife, but her feelings for me had changed. I just wanted her to love me again, to rank me at least as highly as her beloved gold bars. I couldn't help but laugh at myself. Henry was constantly competing with other men, and here I was, competing with money. Charlotte has always loved money. For a time, I'd been like her half-life, just as important as her wealth. She was sharp enough to pick up on my anxiety and tried to cheer me up, though she wasn't particularly good at it. Usually it was the other way around. I was the one doing the comforting. One day, she came to me with an unexpected question. What do you want for your birthday this year? She wanted to surprise me. The fact that she said it aloud already ruined the surprise, but it was such a Charlotte thing to do that I couldn't help but smile. A memory came to mind. Something I'd kept tucked away for years. Back in college, when I moved out of my family home, my grandfather had given me his penthouse apartment in the city. While my parents helped me pack, they stumbled upon an old toy chest and inside it was that childhood marriage contract. My parents teased me about it, saying I'd been flirting since I was a kid. The memories came flooding back then. She'd been my little playmate, someone I hadn't thought of in years. I told Charlotte that our first meeting had been at her brother's birthday party, where she had literally run into me. Even as a child, she hadn't watched where she was going. Sorry. Are you okay? She'd stammered, straightening up with a flustered expression. Her voice had been clear and sweet, and I realized at that moment that she'd crashed straight into my heart. But Charlotte didn't remember that. Not at all. It still irked me that she didn't recall how, during our first blind date, she'd practically glowed with excitement upon seeing me. Clearly, she liked what she saw. No matter. In the end, she became Mrs. Davies. And technically, she had been the one to make the first move. That thought alone gave me some comfort. That's why I'd asked her to write that promise for me, her new marriage contract, a safeguard to reassure myself that she wouldn't leave. Charlotte, with her practical nature, didn't understand its value. To her, only houses, stocks, and gold held any real meaning. I suppose in a way she was right. The world does run on money, and I work hard for that reason. But not for grand ideals, just to ensure a good life for us both. If the family business wasn't such a big deal, I'd love nothing more than to clock in late and leave early every day. Still, I never truly cared about money before Charlotte. It was only after meeting her that I felt a deep desire to provide and succeed. When we were first getting to know each other, I asked about her interests. Her eyes sparkled. I like money. Money is pretty great, I agreed, somewhat caught off guard. Right? In this world, how can you get by without it? If I didn't already know she came from the wealthy Clark family, I might have thought she'd lived through some tough times. She lifted her chin with a smug expression. You've got money, right? Because if not, I'm not marrying you. I nodded. I've got enough to support you. Well, you'd better keep working hard then. It's expensive to take care of me. What could I say? When a woman lays down the law like that, you've got no choice but to step up. After we got married, Charlotte complained sometimes that I was married more to my work than to her. Once, I saw her texting a friend, writing, "My husband's true love is his job." I felt a surge of irritation, but before I could say anything, she followed it up with, "But the reason he works so hard is to take care of me. He really loves me so much. I'm the happiest woman alive. Being a freeloader is the best." Noticing me behind her, Charlotte jumped and then immediately ran to throw her arms around me, smiling sweetly. "You're 2 minutes late today, hubby. I missed you so much. How could I stay mad after that?" I caught her, holding her tightly to keep her from falling. "I'm married to my work, am I?" Charlotte blinked before planting a kiss on my cheek, trying to make amends. "You're married to me, obviously. And you. Who else would I love?" That was all I needed to hear. Reading the room, Charlotte grinned and added, "I'm so lucky to have married the best husband ever. I must have saved the world in a past life." I raised an eyebrow. "All right, what do you want to buy this time?" Giggling, she hopped off me and dashed off to grab her tablet. Mimi Gray sent me some investment opportunities. "Help me take a look." "Money obsessed as usual," I teased, taking the tablet from her. If only you loved me as much as you love your investments. I do. Money is half my life, and you're the other half. Well then, I guess I should feel honored. You absolutely should. Charlotte said it with such conviction that I couldn't help but agree. Fine. If I rank alongside her precious gold, what more could I ask for? The end. Thanks for stopping by. Subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss out on any new videos.